Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
As Christians, we sometimes suffer from mission creep. We were given one job, which was to make disciples of all nations, and yet somehow over time that is translated into a myriad of other things, not least of which is winning at politics. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Our guest tonight will be talking about that and how and where we have kind of diverted and under what influences. He has got a remarkable background. His CV, I guess, includes a doctorate degree in mechanical engineering. He holds 24 patents. He was a leader in technology development at the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory for 16 years. His work's been profiled in the Wall Street Journal, Scientific American, on television as well. And for 7 years, he produced and hosted the groundbreaking radio program Future Quake as the host Dr. Future. He is also an author, and his new book, which is thought-provoking, Two Masters and Two Gospels, Volume 1, The Teaching of Jesus versus the Leaven of the Pharisees in Talk Radio and Cable News. We welcome Dr. Michael Bennett back to the program for first time in far too long. Mike, it's good to talk with you again.
What do you mean? It can't be longer than, say, 9 years or so, is it?
Well, I think it's been 9 years that this program has been out there. So it's well, maybe longer than that, actually, 2009. Okay. Again, as I said before the program, math not my strong suit. So yeah, it has been far too long. Well, you have been working on a couple of other projects.
And by the way, I want to say greetings to all of the bunkeroids out there. It's been too long since I've talked to you all.
Yes, the bunkeroids and the futurians have not collaborated for far too long.
The axis, you mean the bunkeroid futurian axis?
Correct. Yes, that
formed way back in the spring of 2005, if I remember correctly.
That is correct. PID Radio launched in March.
You all were like the John the Baptist of Future Quake. You made the way straight like several weeks ahead of the debut of Future Quake.
Yes,
I remember. But you are worthy of latching my shoe. I want to put that on the record.
Well, I'm glad to know that. I'll add that to my resume, actually.
Oh, good.
We missed you when Chris Pinto came in, and I should mention this too, that you and Chris researched and produced a documentary called Dark Clouds Over Alberton, the true story of the Georgia Guidestones, which we talked about on Skywatch TV several years ago. But you were ill, sadly, and Chris made the trip alone. But kudos to that, because having watched the film, I'm convinced that you and Chris nailed it and identified the mystery man behind the Georgia Guidestones. So well done. That's a mystery that I think we can put in the solved category now.
Well, I hope we did, because I've got his letters in my safety deposit box, including all the original drawings for the Guidestones, including all the gadgets that were supposed to go on that they never got around to building. Mm-hmm. And I'm just so glad I finally, twisted his arm to actually put the real information out there. That was a long time coming. That got shelved for 5 years. And I paced the floor saying, okay, when are you going to release this? When are you going to put that out? So, in hindsight, it didn't change the world, but I'm proud of it because I think it actually accomplished something.
Well, and rightly so.
And there's a message to it.
Absolutely. Rightly so. In fact, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. If people aren't familiar with the Georgia Guidestones and the mystery behind the creator thereof, you really should watch that documentary, because this is one that gets kind of at the heart of what the principalities and powers behind the I don't want to use the phrase Illuminati, but behind, say, certain actors, certain elements in this world hope to accomplish, and they're not the principalities and powers that would be aligned with Jesus Christ. Let's put it that way.
Right, but I will give a little spoiler out there for people. And by the way, if you got Amazon Prime, go watch it for free.
Well, there you go.
I don't get anything out of it anyway, so just go watch it for free there. But the spoiler, sad to tell your friends there's no Nephilim in it.
Yeah,
there's no UFOs. There's not even a Ted Turner in it. There's just real people doing bad things and having bad ideas.
And that, I think, was more interesting anyway. So, because it shows that, there are humans out there who are just the agents of these principalities and powers behind the scenes. But, this is where this conflict, this rubber meets the road. So the new book, Two Masters and Two Gospels, I know this was a project that kind of intruded into work that you were doing on another book that is becoming a series of volumes. What was it about this particular topic, the leaven of the Pharisees in talk radio? How would you define that, and how has it been influencing the church in America?
Wow. Now, you just asked me a question that took me 480 pages to answer. So it's going to be a little hard here to answer that broad a question. And you are right. This was not what I was planning to do. And as I say it in the beginning of the book. And by the way, just so I don't insult your intelligence, I don't know what the audience is familiar with this. Have you had a chance to read the book, or have you heard any presentations on it or capsules or?
Basically, just what I'm seeing. I have not, but basically what I'm seeing at your website, Mike Bennett, which, by the way, bad host, I should have said up front, MikeBennettBooks.com is the link where you'll find the synopsis of the book and where you can order copies. So
right, or CrebosPress.com, the publisher, Crebos Press. But so I didn't know how far you'd gone into that. And other than this little murky teaser that's straight off the back of the book, you're probably not that familiar with what's between the covers. That
is true. I'm kind of acting as the agent for the listener right now, who likewise probably not familiar with what's between the covers.
So if there's Holocaust denial in there or anything like that, you're not even aware of it.
That's why we don't. That's why we don't do
it on your show.
And that's why we don't do the show live. So no worries.
Well, I won't say further, so the listener will find out later when they get a copy. No, actually, that topic is prominent in it, believe it or not. But the book was not a project I had planned to do. I was trucking along in my obscurity. I joke with people. I have my little Unabomber shed that I write my screeds and my manifestos. And I had this bright idea when the Holy War Chronicles was originally going to be a single book. And then I grudgingly agreed to let it be a trilogy. And at this point, it's looking to be at least 12 volumes that are almost all completely written. And I wanted to finish those up before I had to switch gears with the mechanics of publishing and promoting, which is a whole different skill set and little details that an old mind like mine has to learn. So I thought that was a good idea, other than people don't even remember what the War on Terror is. So I have made myself automatically obsolete. Between the time I write on something, it's a current event, and by the time I get it done, it's ancient history. So that's, I guess, the way it is with me.
That's why I focus on stuff that's happened 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. There's no chance of it getting any more obsolete than it already is.
Right. Well, that's a great idea. Yeah, and they won't rewrite that.
Right.
But when I was quietly writing my books, it reduced the ability for me to upset people and get them turned off or whatever, like Future Quake did sometimes, until things start rolling out. And so I sort of kept my head down, didn't appear but once in a blue moon on a show or something. But the last few years, I don't know if you've picked up on this, Derek. Maybe it's just me, but it seems like things have gotten a wee bit heated in our discourse.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's just me. In the fact that about most of my family won't talk to me. A lot of my church friends, all my old mentors. I have new people that I relate to, new things. And I haven't deviated one iota about what I believe about the Lord or the Bible or the basic doctrines. In fact, I believe it more, and that seems to be what alienates people more, surprisingly. But what I had noticed as the last few years was just how incredibly strident I had heard the discourse from fellow Christians. Almost a little tinge of arrogance, very much an others fear-mongering kind of thing, demagoguery in our Christian ranks. And we're experts at that. I say that as a Christian, but it's just gone not even toward people of different religions or other things, but it's getting more inward. And I started a blog called the Two Spies Report, which was something to just let people know that I wasn't dead. and that I was still alive. And if I had an occasional thought on a issue, it's sort of based upon Caleb and Joshua, sort of a Christian Minority Report.
Mm-hmm.
And to show that just because a minority of believers believe it doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. And so I would put on there frequent enough so people could get upset at me, including old Futurians, and get mad at, controversial thoughts that I just sort of threw out there. But I started writing just a few little posts about that. I don't know if you've ever been to my blog, but starting some posts, and some people it stirred, other people it infuriated. And I just started taking notes about what was going on, and also seeing some connections, I thought, and some relationships. And I think it was my buddy Adam Saint at Conspired who said, you really need to get this out. We're in a cycle right now where this actually needs to be put out for some debate before it becomes semi-obsolete. I guess unlike my other work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kept working, and I did get diverted. I wanted to finish the Holy War Chronicles, started writing this stuff, and in the course of about a year's time, I had enough for 3 volumes. I got a little bit to add to it,
Mm-hmm.
but 3 big books. And so this was totally a detour, and I released the first volume just, in the last month or two, couple months. But what it really goes into detail is basically a sort of a chain of events of trying to solve a mystery and how this came about. And the thing that really clicked with me was that I noticed in these heated arguments I would have in home group, at church, or just, sitting around church, or my friends, and particularly with family, was that when we were going hot and heavy on some of the prominent issues of the day, I never really heard them mention too much about, according to what Jesus said, blah, blah, blah. Or I believe this about this current ethical issue because of Jesus said this, or Paul said this, or, Elijah or whoever.
Mm-hmm.
And but what I would hear them say were things that I knew just enough. Being a homebody, I'm not commuting for years, but I knew enough by listening on to things that these were talking points that had been making their way to most of what most of us Christians normally listen to in conservative talk radio, cable news, where they all sort of get handed the same memo and start reading from it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that this was what they were using to bolster their very provocative arguments, particularly to take really strong, arrogant, aggressive is the word I'm looking for, positions against other people. And I thought, why is this? These people, I'm in church with them all the time. They're church-going people. How did this come about? And suddenly, I'm a scientist by training. I've had oodles and oodles of mathematics. And I realized this is just really a numbers game. This is a statistical thing. Because, of the few people who really go to a really good church and will hear at most maybe a half-hour sermon on Sunday, possibly even about what Jesus said, or the kingdom of heaven, or maybe the Sermon on the Mount on a good Sunday. At most, they might get 30 minutes of that, and they may or may not be paying attention or daydreaming at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then the next morning, they get in their car, and for 45 minutes, they're a captive audience to the talk radio that they turn in on their radio and listen to whatever those people say, and they've got their rapt attention. They get to work, and there's a good chance they may turn it on their radio at their desk and either, turn it up louder and listen to it, or subliminally.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get the same 45 minutes on the way home. And then often they'll be fixing dinner, and they turn on the TV and catch cable news for the rest of it, sometimes from the same voices. And then the next day they repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have day after day during the week, maybe a little bit on the weekends, possibly the same crowd on a Sunday morning show even before they head to church. And so just from a common sense saturation standpoint, it makes a lot of sense that people are seeing this as what is basically another gospel. And it's another gospel being preached with another set of values being given by what I would call strangers, people these people are celebrities, but we really don't know them.
Mm-hmm.
We know their name, but we don't know what they're about, why they're doing what they're doing, why they say. Occasionally we get glimpses. I know a number of years ago when Glenn Beck was hot and heavy on TV, there was a big thing that came out about the changes he made in certain policy positions because a sponsor put down several $1 million. And so he changed it. And I think that's probably the norm. But, in the Bible, they present these kind of people as hirelings. The hireling that comes for pay to try to be a substitute shepherd to the sheep. The only problem is when the going gets tough, the hireling takes off and disappears. And when I realized that these are the people who have the ears of the people around me, church folk around me, and trying to figure out, is there a common theme on the positions that they take? And again, sitting in church and listening to the Gospels, I came to the position, two things. One is that whether it's their position about government assistance or whether government is evil inherently or not, about how immigrants should be looked at, things like worker protections or environmental protections or worker safety, that the positions that were being foisted upon them were almost always consistently the same positions we've always heard from what I would call the wealth classes. The financial industry, Wall Street, big business, banking, this kind of stuff. The positions that they've always held are the positions that are almost right across the board on all these issues, were a consistent position that's basically a Darwinistic one. And
so a social Darwinism has infected the church.
Certainly. In fact, I told a brother, we were talking about some of the issues going on now, and he told me that I just worried too much about the weak. And I told him, this is a good Christian brother, and I told him, I said, I love him, but I said, that's what Darwinism, and I hate to say it, but basically libertarianism, which was sort of a thinking that I had come to respect. You listen to my old Future Quake shows, I tip my hat to them. And somebody asked me what I thought about it now, and I cover that a lot in this book. And I said, as far as libertarian in hindsight, I said, I walked through the libertarian garden, and I saw some flowers along the way. I saw a flower of non-coercion and a flower of self-determination, a flower of free association. And I picked those flowers and kept them. But the more I dug down in the foliage, I found a ton of weeds. And that's why I kept on walking. I picked those flowers and kept them, and I walked on through the meadow. And what I was telling my friend is, I said, this view about worrying about the weak, dragging down the rest of us 90 and 9, is the thinking of Darwinism. And it is not the thinking of a civilization. It is the thinking of the jungle, where the stragglers of the herd aren't worried about. And really there's two views about it. The other view is espoused by Christ, where he would leave the 90 and 9 to go find the one weakling. And in hindsight, when I look over the probably 25 issues, really hotbed issues in my book, all of them sort of fall in one of those two states. You buy into one set of viewpoints or the other. And from studying the Gospels and trying to figure out how do I frame this in a biblical framework to understand it, since we've been going through the Gospels in church around this time I was doing this, I suddenly realized that if I was going to throw a blanket around it in biblical terms of this mindset that disparages the poor, assumes that they're up to no good, or they're lazy, or they're trying to scam us all, they're taking us for a ride, or immigrants are coming to take our stuff away, or fill in the blanks, or we don't want people to help protect people and their jobs or the safe work environment or things like that. That this kind of thinking in the Bible was described by Christ as the leaven of the Pharisees. And he told them, he said, to beware the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And what I do in my book is I go through and just go from cover to cover through the Gospels. I document what all the positions the Pharisees had about the poor, about assistance for the poor, about people who were different, people who had different ideas, people that weren't born across the tracks, like the Galileans were considered. And I document all of these, and then I condense it down to about actually 31 basic opinions of a religious group that saw themselves as the religious leaders of their society, as God leaders, that were colluding with big business in their day, and actually were operating, as I document in my book, they were operating a scam operation that I didn't realize in the pages of the Bible was clearly delineated, and that Jesus made a fundamental focus of his ministry. And as I show in my book, in the historical section of the book, is still going on. It's still going on throughout the 20th century. And in the remaining volumes, I'm going to show how it's continued on in the 21st. And now, in my view, it's become the elephant in the room, in my views. When I look at what's going on these public issues and what the, quote, religious leaders are saying today, I now can see whose mouthpieces they are, who they're answering to, and why. And it's like one of those little laser pictures you put on the wall and you can't see the pattern in it, and you keep staring at it, and all of a sudden when it jumps out, you can't help but not see it. And that's what I feel like by the time I finish this book. And I will say, this sounds sensationalistic, but I will say that this book, beyond my PhD research and all the future quake stuff I did and anything else I've been a part of, this by far is the most important thing I've ever done within the pages of this book. It's the most controversial. It creates a crisis of faith for every single person that I have noticed that has read it. Either they throw it across the room before they get a few pages into it. If they hang into it, I sort of call it the page 168 litmus test. Page 168, I take a little break from preaching in the book, and I start into the history of how this happened. If my hypothesis is correct about the leaven of the Pharisees reigning today in talk radio and cable news, then the question comes, how did that happen? And I went and started digging for a history that'll make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And it is more disturbing than any topic I ever covered in Future Quake. And I don't just say that to try to promote this. I had a brother today that's a very, very activist, pretty hardcore Christian, very, very conservative background. And I was surprised to hear from him, a very distinguished leader in the church. And he went through this, and it had a marked effect on his perception of things. And that's what I want to accomplish with this. I don't want to do anything less in this book than to try to change the worldview of the people who read it, where they'll never look at anything ever the same again. I know that's promising a lot, but that's the intention. And when people start seeing the details of what I have in there, I know this is a long preamble. You asked me question 1, but that's where this went. And it was on a journey that like I've never been on before. And I will never be the same after having put together what put together. I would like to say it was some divine providence, and that sounds pretty heavy-handed. But in hindsight, the information that was made privy to me, and I have had to go back a long, long ways to get this information. It all starts to make sense to me now. And it has brought me a clarity, a vision of where I want to go, in the future of my life, to know who to be looking out for, who to beware, the kind of buzzwords and keywords I need to be careful of, who not to associate with. And so, this is really a launch pad from what I'm doing. So I know we've not gotten into too many details here, but there you go.
No, but if you're going to tackle a project like this, and again, the title of the book, Two Masters and Two Gospels, Volume 1, approaching it with anything less than that kind of, with that kind of goal in mind, I want to change hearts and minds with this, really is not doing the subject justice, because this is, biting off a lot. But I think as Christians, if we're thinking about it, and understanding that the body of Christ poses the greatest threat. The greatest threat to the goals of the fallen realm, the principalities and powers, then we should expect them to try to work their way into the church by influencing us, whispering, sweet nothings in our ears to get us off task, to get us to rationalize other activities as necessary to the goal, which, of course, the Great Commission is to make disciples of all nations. We need to preach, Christ and Him crucified, like Paul did. But wouldn't it be easier to do that if we held the House and the Senate and got the president in the White House so he could appoint the right judges, and then we could really do some good for the kingdom. But over time, the goal becomes, or rather, the means becomes the end. And that, I don't think should take any of us by surprise. And yet when it confronts us, it's a little bit startling to realize, oh, wait a minute. We've been looking outside the church to find targets for our, theological guns. And yet the enemy is sitting here in the pews alongside us. Mm-hmm. And they may not even realize that they've been compromised. How does this happen? Where is this coming from? Is this an organized effort, or is this something that's just happening in the spirit realm? We don't even realize it's happening until one day we wake up and it's like, oh, we've been soaking in this all along.
Well, just to sort of tie in a little bit to what you're alluding to, the introduction of this book is entitled "Kingdom Confusion," or the spiritual rat poison of today's talk radio and cable news. Mm-hmm. I like subtle titles, and sort of that us versus them kind of thing when we're duking it out. And by the way, I believe in activism. I think it's part of loving your brother. I'm not into I don't take this wrong, in a bunker mentality of just letting the world go to wearing a handbasket and we're just going to wait for the rapture. I think that's a cop-out. I don't think that you can say you love your brother and do that when they're suffering. But as far as that us versus them, I mentioned an early verse, and the first 167 pages and the tail end of the book are chock full of just what the Lord says. But I mentioned that when Joshua was coming up to Jericho, and you remember when he came up with the guy with the sword in his hand, mm-hmm. that was a commander of the army of the Lord. Right. And Joshua's comment was, are you for us or for our enemies? Mm-hmm. In other words, are you for that other political party, or are you for the ones that we're currently using right now? And you know what his answer was? He said, neither. Yeah. But as a commander of the army of the Lord, I have come. And at least Joshua had the presence of mind to sort of recover there, mm-hmm. and just say, okay, what does the Lord have for this servant? And I think he quickly learned his lesson that this wasn't about warring tribes. This was about the Lord and His work and what His agenda is. And are we going to get involved in it? But the giveaway for where this book goes, and again, I don't mean to disappoint our traditional listeners, that this is not going to take us, although I will say, before they get through this book, they're going to get a little divine counsel in there. They're going to get some, Psalm 82 mm-hmm. In there. They're going to get some little goodies that they're looking, and a whole lot of weirdness, but true weirdness when it gets toward the end of it. But I sort of give away the angle of who I make the main boogeyman of this. When I quote Jesus, and this is a very well-known passage in Luke 16, when he says, no man can serve two masters, for he'll either hate one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, mm-hmm. were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him. Mm-hmm. Now, we grew up, at least you and me, grew up in the early days of cable, and we saw the TV evangelists come along, and they're sort of easy pickings for mm-hmm. this. Oh, you're talking about the big money preachers, throwing all the money and the air conditioners and the doghouse and the gold faucets, and all that kind of stuff. that's sort of what we think of with those big money preachers and what's going on. And that's definitely there.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is this money obsession and selfishness does not stay with the prosperity gospel preachers. It percolates in our entire church culture. We've all been affected by it. People who don't go walking around with Rolexes and pinky rings are still preaching the same bile that these jokers are that we see on TV. And in the history, and I think you're sort of opening the door for me.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, when people have had me on these shows, because there's so much material, quotable stuff in this, they usually have me on for a long series of them because I have a hard time knowing where to break. But just going to the history side of it, one of the things that really opened the door for me was when I started seeing about in the 20th century how easily the church culture became a tool of exploitation of other parties. And to this day, most of the people I know had no idea about most of it. And just to give you, this is like a little preamble to the main part of it, of the main people who I propose that basically bought out our church about circa 1940.
Mm-hmm.
Just to let people who are skeptical know how easily this could be done under our noses without us knowing it. And again, I'm not talking about a select group of weirdos on TV. I'm talking about all of us. Around late 40s when the Red Scare really got going and the Cold War got going, some of the experts, historical experts that I quote from, one particular book useful is called The Spiritual Industrial Complex by Dr. Jonathan Herzog, who was he came from the Conservative Hoover Institute, from Stanford, PhD in American history. He documents how back in those days, amongst other references I have, that they were so worried that Americans were going to actually find communism attractive that they had only one tool they thought they could do to actually get people to resist the temptation of communism, and that was to make it a holy war by emphasizing its atheism.
Godless communism.
To sway the public.
Yeah.
And so what they began was to do, and they set up in these boardrooms starting in May 1947 in the White House, where it says where CEOs and media moguls met under the auspices of the Justice Department, naming their new group the American Heritage Foundation. They proposed to invigorate a generic faith or civil religion into the public square to win a Cold War propaganda and psychological conflict. And what they did was they got these top clergy officials that were part of it, and the guys who were the expert spooks from World War II, who were used to running the radio stations to do black propaganda in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the main guys who ran it was Dwight Eisenhower. He ran a radio station in Germany that was supposedly being operated by dissident Germans.
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't Germans, they were American troops. And they were making a propaganda to get the German public to turn another direction.
Mm-hmm.
They took all of their techniques in propaganda and started building this mythology that we now associate with guys like David Barton.
Right.
The whole thing about the knee in the snow and,
Washington's
George Washington and city shining on a hill, blah, blah, blah. It's funny when you think about some of these things, even guys like Ronald Reagan were quoting about the mystery man that showed up that got the whole Continental Congress together to approve the Declaration of Independence. Those stories actually came from Manly P. Hall, believe it or not.
Oh, my.
And he was a follower of Manly P. Hall. Ronald Reagan was. But what they did, if I can just give you a few little quotes here about what they saw to do with this, they said they released a report called One Nation Under God, which is where that whole phrase really started coming from, was from this. They had people like the American Legion involved, which were the guys who helped do the business plot, to overthrow FDR.
Right.
You're familiar with that,
Yep.
They were the ones that made Mussolini their Man of the Year for the American Legion. They used the Advertising Council, which was before then known as the War Advertising Council, which were all Madison Avenue and Wall Street guys. But what they said under this report, which really kicked all this off, was that there was a need to weld religion to democracy and called for public comparisons between the Bible and America's most revered national documents. Now, they had some key collaborators of clergymen, but almost all of them were top Fortune 500 businessmen. These were businessmen and advertising specialists that they said that what we need to sell is that recognition of a supreme being. Now, you get it, supreme being. They're not talking about Jesus Christ. There's no talk about the cross or any kind of what we consider the doctrine of the good news. It's the same kind of supreme being like you might hear in a Masonic lodge, okay?
The great
Some
architect. Yeah.
That is the first and most basic expression of Americanism. In fact, they even convinced Eisenhower, since he wasn't a member of a church, that he should join a church when he became president. So he was the first one baptized, sitting president. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not.
But in the few years of this time, so many things that we thought were something that went back for generations and generations in our history were all birthed out of these boardrooms with these guys. The "In God We Trust" on our stamps, on our coins, where they added "under God," under the Pledge of Allegiance. You know, at the time, the Pledge of Allegiance was written by this Baptist socialist, Francis Bellamy, who had written this book, Jesus Was a Socialist. And their actual salute looked like a Nazi salute. You've probably seen pictures of it.
I have, yeah.
But they decided to take over that and sort of overhaul it for their purposes. That's when they built the Congressional Prayer Room, where they put in a stained glass window with a picture of Washington kneeling in prayer, sort of making him like a substitute religious saint. The whole national motto, "In God We Trust," was picked right at that time. And the House report in there said that phrase was of psychological value. Which I don't know if our faith in the Lord was intended to just be for psychological value.
Yeah, it'd be used as a psyop, right?
Right. But one thing they did at this time, and again, this is just to let people to sort of let their guard down a little bit and realize how easy our world can be manipulated by strangers we never meet. One of the things they did at the time, Truman wanted to start universal military training for everybody when they get out of high school, because it was an ideal laboratory to sort of force new beliefs on people. And so they started a pilot program at Fort Knox, not far from where I grew up, in 47. And they said this was the goal, where military leaders could engineer a generation of patriotic, virtuous, cold warriors, or basically mujahideen, holy warriors. And they started putting these people through like 6 to 7 hours of religious training a day. And they would actually go and take these recruits, and this was mandatory. Everybody was that age, had to go through it, where they had to be profiled religiously, and then they would be led to a religious conversion decision as part of this taxpayer-funded program. And then they would basically get congregations to adopt them. They would make sure they had no access to liquor. They had the bartenders in town, basically as sort of cops, narcs on them if they were caught out doing what we think of soldiers normally doing. And so they also would not tolerate what they called prissiness or any kind of pin-up pictures. Well, they, in a way, sort of accomplished something. I mean, they were getting their Spartan state. However, as soon as they started to slack off, they went back to their old ways. So they really didn't accomplish anything. They were just obeying orders. But the one thing that did keep that was with the officers. And so the officers kept what they called the Knox method of character guidance, where they would have to have 6-hour-long lectures on the 10 Commandments, sanctity of marriage, relationship to democracy and religion. And these were things that officers still had to go through. And it doesn't surprise me that we get guys like Jerry Boykin and people like that, that come out of that kind of treatment. But as they started amping it up and seeing this whole use of religion and psychological warfare, Truman set up what he called a psychological strategy board that comprise the CIA, the Department of State, Defense, and others, and they studied from this report, quote, the potential role of religion in psychological warfare. And in their report, I found it says that the potentialities of religion as an instrument for combating communism are universally tremendous. Religion is an established force which calls forth men's strongest emotions. Our overall objective is seeking the use of religion as a Cold War instrumentality.
So
now,
in other words,
you and I both know that religion is good, certainly. I mean, when it's done for the right reasons.
Right.
But this is a co-opting of something very sacred and very good for hirelings to use.
Essentially, what you're saying is in post-World War II America, the government essentially tried to weaponize Christ.
Right. Well, at least a generic religion.
Or a generic religion.
Yeah.
And what we were raised in, both of us were born at the tail end of the baby boom, raised in that America that was created with this conflation of God and country, which is something I've talked about and written some chapters about for various books, where we find a lot of churches in America, and I think this is safe to say, that you'd have more pushback from the congregation if you took the American flag out of the sanctuary than if you took the Bible out of the sanctuary.
I certainly agree to that. Yeah, I certainly agree to that. What if somebody didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? In there, there would just be, they'd tear the place apart. And I'm sorry. I mean, I love my country. I would die for my neighbor here on my street. But I consider those churches an embassy of another kingdom. And as embassies, they should reflect primarily the loyalty to the kingdom that they represent.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if we are truly ambassadors, then what we always need to remember is what is the agenda of the country who we represent.
Mm-hmm.
And we're there to further that agenda where we're planted rather than vice versa. But, another one of these programs they did was to cultivate an image of the U.S. worldwide by using a 3-person council of religious leaders to look at the moral and religious factors of psychological warfare. And they recommended, now this is applied to the U.S., that the public leaders emphasize the historic and continuing influence of religion on American society, the spiritual roots of U.S. institutions, and the religious components of major holidays. And there's a few groups that are very, very disturbing, I find, in here. One of them is called a Foundation for Religious Action and Social and Civil Order, or Frasco. Now, if that's not a COINTELPRO kind of name, I don't know what
Social
is.
and Civil Order, yeah.
Yeah, these members included Billy Graham, Henry Ford II, Herbert Hoover, and others. But the thing that I've not really gotten to yet is almost all of this was run by Fortune 500 companies.
Mm.
The religious element of what they were selling. I don't know if you knew this, but the president of General Electric, Charles Wilson, who ran a lot of this, outfits like Religion and American Life, where basically they were given hundreds of hours of primetime TV time, hundreds of newspaper ran all their articles, and it was all this substitute religion that they were putting, but it was all to support the agenda that big business has. Unbridled capitalism, free enterprise without any kind of checks. Government is evil. It was associated with communism. This was what they had been trying to sell in their PR efforts in big business. And all of a sudden, doors started opening to do this. Now, these were originally triggered by the government. The bulk of my book is on the actions that the big business groups like the National Association of Manufacturers and Chamber of Commerce, on their own time and nickel, started buying our clergy to start making another gospel that became the gospel that we know down today would be commonly coined the religious right. But it was actually coined by these business trade groups that actually wrote it and just found the right mouthpieces for it.
Mm.
And that's the more disturbing part of where I take a lot of this information. Oh, I was going to mention this Charles Wilson guy. He was actually put in charge of our entire country's economy. This was during the leading up to the Korean War, and basically the President Truman, signed over emergency powers, and I quote a lengthy announcement on the front page of the New York Times, where this guy was given complete control over all of the industry in America. He could set the wages for everybody. They abolished the unions. He set prices for everything, and he was basically a dictator. And he answered to no one but the president. Any other branch of the government and leaders, everybody answered to him. And how many of us really knew much about that?
No, I certainly didn't.
And this was not, we weren't even invaded. I mean, this is not like we had an army marching across. It wasn't like, Barbarossa, where you got the Nazi armies just marching across the steppes of Russia. This was a war on the other side of the world, that involved a lot of people. And meanwhile, in their willingness to try to fight communism, they basically turned us into a communistic economy.
Well, fascism is just the flip side of that coin. I mean, it's two sides of a socialist coin.
Right.
But for some reason, the two of them, and maybe this is the, Hegelian dialectic at work, but for whatever reason, the fascists and the socialists just seem to, or the communists, hate each other, or at least that's what they would like the rest of us to believe.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff that's justified in the name of fighting communism that was justified back then.
Right.
Was swallowed whole cloth. That you'd like to think that today in the internet age, with a lot of alternate sources of information, that we wouldn't be as easily duped as back in the day when you only had 3 networks, and most of them, at least during Korea, most of them weren't even on TV yet. So, but I don't know. I mean, the messaging is
now they just have more tools. Now they just have more tools to use over us.
Yeah, and most of the Church of Jesus Christ is reduced to meme poster theology.
Have you noticed that people have gotten more discerning in the last generation?
Picked up on that right off.
It's like, oh man, people really learned from past mistakes. They've really gotten pretty wise to things. We live in the information age, and I have never seen more people who are more quality information deprived.
Yeah.
Than ever. We have a time where you can go get an education. A lot of states, they'll at least cover 2 years of your education. You can go get an education. You can go find out. We've got information. You don't have to go to the library. You can get online, go to archive.org and get any kind of quality book, some form to read for free or close to free. And I have never found a time where people are least inclined to sit down and read a quality work by someone who's a real expert. In all of my days, there are less people sitting reading a book than there'll ever be.
That's true. I kind of laughed before when you talked about people throwing your book across the room. It's like, well, I can guarantee that won't happen when I read your book. Which, by the way, during this conversation, I just purchased the Kindle version, and we'll do so. But I see, because it's on Kindle, I'm not going to throw the book. See, because it would hurt your machine. It would demolish the iPad in which it resides. So, your book is safe. But
the only sad thing, you got the ebook, which everybody, if you get the ebook, that's great. Is that I have a real dandy index in the back, because there's a million cast of characters, and they don't normally put those in ebooks because they figure you'll word search. But I got a really high class index because all of this was preamble to the punchline in the heart of the book. Everything I just shared with you, and I skipped over some of the worst quotes on some of the stuff, was that I just want to show people, is it possible that people we don't know that have an agenda, even a money agenda, could get in some of the most sacred things? I'm not talking about the gospel. I'm not talking about our belief about the resurrection. I'm talking about all the other stuff that we value, that all of that kind of stuff could have been engineered under our nose, even as smart as we are, even people like you and me, Derek. But I don't want to interrupt you if you want to carry on, but that leads us up to the key event of my book that everything hinges on.
And believe it or not, that's the cliffhanger that's going to have to tide you over until next week. Dr. Michael Bennett, the author of Two Masters and Two Gospels, when we sat down to do the interview, I told him we normally try to keep the interviews to about 45 minutes or thereabouts to keep these podcasts to a manageable length. But we got to an hour and a half into the interview and realized we were still sort of on the prelude, the foundation behind why this book is relevant to us today. So I'm splitting the hour and a half into two interviews. We'll pick up where we left off next Sunday evening, July 5th. Coming up, hey, I got some news about the Sons of God Giants of Old conference we talked about last week, and a couple of thoughts about what's happening in the world around us when A View from the Bunker continues.
Unveiling the ancient realms of demonic kings and Satan's battle plan for Armageddon. Skywatch TV is proud to announce two new special offers. The Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series. Sold separately, this exclusive offer retails for $90. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. But wait, now you have the option to upgrade and expand your collection by including all 5 previously released books in the Red Wing Saga. The expanded collection, which includes all 8 books and the Search for the Rephaim DVD documentary, holds a retail value of $190. Yours now for your donation of only $100 plus shipping and handling. So don't delay. Order the Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series now. Available at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985.
Shall we begin? Let's begin now.
Talking the walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. You'll find us online at vftb.net. The easiest way to keep track of us is to download the free mobile app. It works on Android and iOS devices, and you'll find links to those app stores at vftb.net. We're on Twitter at View from Bunker, or my personal Twitter feed at Derek Gilbert. The Facebook page, View from the Bunker, and now on Parlay, and I am reliably informed that it is in fact pronounced parlay. Looks like parlor to us English speakers, but no, it is parlay, as in the French. Parlay, the handle there, Derek P. Gilbert at parlay.com. The protest culture that has swept across America over the last month has reached our small corner of the Ozarks. There were, I think, 3 different protests in Springfield, Missouri this weekend. One in Branson took place outside a clothing store called Dixie Outfitters. And there's a little more to it than just the name. I mean, I can understand the arguments against the wisdom of a clothing store. They also sell some Confederate memorabilia in this particular day and age, named Dixie Outfitters. But the owner of the store, it's a husband and wife. The husband's father is apparently some official, or was at some point within the last 30 years, of the Ku Klux Klan in the area. And the Springfield News Leader reported in 2015 that the gentleman 30 years ago, at the age of 20 or 21, tried to adopt a section of US 65 near the Arkansas-Missouri border in the name of the Ku Klux Klan. You know, one of those adopt a highway things for litter control. That application was rejected. But bear in mind, again, this was 30 years ago. More than half a lifetime ago for this gentleman. So, and according to his wife, they've not had any contact with his father in years. And yet, because of that, and this isn't the first protest recently, there was one a couple of weeks ago, and sadly, a woman was caught on video saying something really inappropriate and frankly racist. And that video went viral, and so protesters were back out there this weekend. I've not seen a report as I record this on Saturday evening as to what took place down there, but we pray for the safety of those protesting and counter-protesting. I know a couple of people who went to the protests, and I pray for their safety because I know he's crazy enough to get a little provocative at times. Not in a hateful way, just asking questions in a way that kind of highlights the silliness sometimes of those who feel it's necessary to go out and protest. Let's be honest, and I'm not defending anything of anyone connected to this particular store, just pointing out that for a lot of people below the Mason-Dixon line, the name Dixie and is really a source of regional pride. It has nothing to do with the history of slavery in the southern states. Just as my mother's from North Dakota and she's proud of being from North Dakota, but she has no interest in reliving the struggle between, say, Custer's cavalry and the Native Americans in the Dakotas. So we as a nation just need to take a breath, but there are forces on both sides who will not do so because they're being influenced, whether they recognize it or not, by the principalities and powers behind the scenes that want to keep us fighting one another. Sharon and I have used this illustration before, that episode of Star Trek where the Federation officers, the Federation crew, and the Klingons that they've captured are pitted against each other by a supernatural entity that feeds off hatred. And I think in some ways we see what that would look like played out on the streets of these United States. Not to say that there aren't things that we can't do better, things that we can't change or shouldn't change. Just saying that doing it by hurling invective and sometimes physical objects at each other is not a way to accomplish that change. This weekend, the Battle Ready Conference took place. This was a virtual conference to take the place of the physical gathering. It was supposed to have taken place in San Antonio this weekend, and some wonderful interaction because of video conferencing tools that are available to us now. And really enjoyed weighing in on some of the chat rooms and commenting during some of the presentations. Hope you had the opportunity to take advantage of it. And there will be, as I understand it, a DVD set available after the fact. So keep your eye on the website there, battlereadyconference.org. Now, last weekend, we talked with Dr. Judd Burton about the upcoming Sons of God, Giants of Old Conference, July 17th and 18th of 2020. This is at the Fellowship in Lubbock, Texas. That's the church pastored by Dan Crestman. At the time of the recording, I had committed to Judd to be there as one of the speakers, along with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Doug Hamp, Dr. Judd Burton, of course, Dr. Greg Reed, Dr. Aaron Judkins, Joe Taylor, curator of the Mont Blanco Fossil Museum, and then Sharon and I we had originally planned to go there. She's got a lot of writing on her plate, so she had begged off. I was still planning to go, but then was informed last Sunday morning that last Monday morning, rather, that we have now scheduled an interview session for Skywatch TV on Friday, July 17th. So I will not be able to attend the Sons of God, Giants of Old Conference this year. I will, however, record a new presentation, something brand new for Judd. Hate to leave him hanging after he'd committed to a time slot for me. So I will do that and submit that. The rest of the speakers, as far as I know, are planning to be there. And if you'd like to be there yourself, I'm calling this the best little conference in America because the cost to attend is very, very reasonable, much lower than most other conferences. And it's a wonderful gathering with some really, really solid information. Again, the Sons of God, Giants of Old 8 Conference. You'll find out more information at Judd Burton's website. That's burtonbeyond.com. The Skywatch TV Defender Conference. We've had to make that a virtual conference as well. Branson and the corporate owners of the hotel, the Chateau on the Lake, could not commit to allowing us to bring everybody to the sold-out conference. If they weren't going to allow 2,000 people in there for the 2,000 people who'd purchased registrations, then that just wasn't going to work. I mean, how do you decide? 2,000 people purchase tickets, but they're only going to allow people to sit every, sixth seat or something. That was not going to work. So this is now a virtual conference, but we've added new speakers who would not have been able to attend in person. So we're trying to make this a bigger deal. We're going to make all of last year's presentations available as well when you sign up. And this one will be sort of like a new season on Netflix. At 2 p.m. on Thursday, 2 p.m. Central Time on Thursday, August 27th, all of the presentations will be released at once. So you can binge watch them on your schedule. They'll be available for 90 days, and you can sign up at defenderconference.com. Some of the new speakers include Steve Quayle. Steve Quayle New York Times bestselling author Jonathan Cahn, Joel Richardson. We're trying to confirm that Jonathan Cahn, who was going to be there in person, we're trying to confirm, pretty sure that he will be available, but that's not confirmed yet for the virtual conference. Other speakers include Pastor Carl Gallups, Dr. Michael Lake, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Jaco Booyens, Dr. Michael Heiser, Drew Graffia will be presenting now, the radical Christian, and many others. To find out more and to sign up, and hopefully now this makes it available to you if you were not able to travel to the Defender Conference, either because travel was inconvenient, unaffordable, or because it sold out too quickly. Now, as a virtual conference, now it's available worldwide and to you. DefenderConference.com is the website, DefenderConference.com. The weekend after that, the Warrior Summit in Retreat in High Hill, Missouri. That's at the High Hill Christian Camp. Jamie Walden is the host. This is really an unstructured weekend getaway, family event. And we hope to see you there. We're looking forward to this. Dr. Michael Lake will be there. Coach Dave Daubenmeier, Dr. Mike Spalding, Tim Alberino. Looking forward to seeing him. Jamie Walden, of course, and Bob Griswold. To find out more, log on to omegadynamics.org, omegadynamics.org. Later in September, the Nephilim Again Conference in Newark is Delaware. Newark is Delaware. Newark is either New Jersey or Ohio, and in this case, it's Ohio. Russ Dizdar, L.A. Marzulli, Drew Graffia, and more. To find out more, NephilimAgain.com. The following weekend, we're right back in the Columbus, Ohio area at the Embassy Suites at the Columbus Airport for the East Coast Prophecy Conference hosted by Southwest Radio Church. Pastor Carl Gallups, Pastor Billy Crone, Larry Spargimino, Bill Federer, Bob Glaze, and others will be there. Sharon and I, honored to be a part of that one. You find out more at swrc.com, swrc.com, and then into October, Future Vision 2020 from Prophecy Watchers. Sharon and I both speaking at this conference, along with Ellie Marzulli, Tommy Ice, Bill Salas, Pastor Billy Crone, Tim Alberino, Carl Tykrib, Ken Johnson, Dr. Michael Lake, Joel Richardson, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, and more. That'll be a great gathering. ProphecyWatchers.com to find out more about that one and to sign up, and we hope to see you there. Please leave a review of A View from the Bunker on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever else you find us, which is, of course, wherever fine podcasts are sold. A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House, released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod, his website, incompetech.com. Our announcer is D.C. Good. Next Sunday night, July 5th, 2020, part 2 of the interview with Dr. J. Michael Bennett, author of Two Masters, Two Gospels. Until then, remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.